Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everyone to our LinkedIn Live today. My name is Stephanie Dorwart from Altius Healthcare Consulting Group, and Randy Lynn and I are really excited to share information with you today regarding recipe for success and productivity. We're going to dive deep into a recipe analogy, and I'm going to let Randy Lynn start by sharing a little bit about herself, and then we're going to share everything about productivity, how we can use the ingredients for that with clarity and execution and momentum, and most importantly, how you can use it to create a culture of excellence within your hospital or healthcare organization. Randy Lynn, are you ready to kick it off?
Absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's been a little while since Stephanie and I have jumped on a live together, but I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I'm glad. Welcome back to anybody that has joined us before. For those of you that are new to our conversations, I'm Randy Lynn Lucas. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at Altius, and I may be at times a little too passionate around all things productivity. But I am excited to talk through that recipe of success with all of you today and with Stephanie. So let's go ahead. Let's dive in.
So I think, when we're talking about productivity and we're really thinking about definitions and everyone's first initial responses, productivity often gets, I'd say, victimized or even villainized within, the industry, within, conversations, because all too often we use it as a weapon. And today we're talking about the recipe for success. And all of us have made recipes in the past. Think about that time that you were following the recipe perfectly and exactly, and something went horribly wrong. All too often, when we're thinking about productivity, we can have those same experiences with our organizations. So I want to encourage everyone to participate in, when you think about productivity, no holds barred, whatever the first thing that is to come to mind, what do you think about? What is the first feeling that you have? Drop it in the chat, write it in your notebook, participate. If you're watching this after the fact, feel free to drop it after we go live. But what do you think of when productivity comes up? Randy Lynn, when we're working with our clients, what are some of the first things that they think of when productivity comes up? What do we often hear?
Well, I think you nailed it when you said that it can be the villain and it's weaponized. I think that far too often people associate productivity with a layoff. They associate it with less staff. They associate it with more work. And they don't necessarily think about the positive things and the momentum that can come from really doing productivity the right way. I think because it's been done so poorly in the past, when and I think people hold on to that, right? When you say, oh, when was the last time you had a productivity engagement? And the answer is 10 years ago. Well, I think we can let that go. I think we can move on from that. But unfortunately, people hold on to that because it's too emotionally driven. There's just far too much emotion that gets associated with productivity because of the stigma of it from the past. So I think that's what we see a lot of is like, oh no, productivity, not again. Where really we should and we could think about things a lot differently.
Absolutely. When we embrace productivity and we embrace staffing effectiveness and we embrace workforce optimization, it really becomes that foundation of understanding where you have opportunities for the organization. So instead of looking at it negatively, it can become your recipe for success because it points you towards opportunity. It really reinforces in many ways areas where you might have to pay attention, or places that your team's already operating at high cylinders and doing very well from an efficiency perspective. It might show you where those gold stars are and really starts to lay the groundwork for where you need to go next. So I know that when we think about productivity, often what we hear a lot of is, I can't possibly do anything else. I'm already busy. I'm already productive. My team is so busy. We can't schedule anything else. We can't do anything else. And we feel that we're always busy all day long. But Randy Lynn, is that the same thing as being productive?
Well, I think we know the answer to that is no, right? We can fill our time with a lot of things that might look or feel busy, but they're not necessarily productive. And I think that we have to be really honest with ourselves. And as leaders, we have to be honest with our team and ask the hard questions. We need to ask ourselves and our team, does that task add value? Does that meeting add value? does that report add value? And these are the things that we need to step back and ask the question and be honest with ourselves with the answer. We can fill our day with things that don't add value. And if they don't add value, whether to the team, to you as a leader for your team, to the patient, to the process, to operations, whatever it might be, then we maybe need to reconsider it. We also need to ask ourselves the questions of, do we have the right person doing the right tasks? Because if they added steps to the process or they are continually producing errors, they're busy. They're busy, but they're not productive, and they're certainly not adding value if they're creating errors or creating a downstream impact that has to lead, or that leads to rework or denials and in billing or whatever it might be. So I really think we need to ask ourselves those questions and answer them honestly to determine if we have become efficient at the wrong tasks, but are we effective in those tasks? We could do the wrong task all day. And so that's part of it too. Again, we're busy, but we're not necessarily productive and adding value.
Yeah, they're two completely different things. And when you're working in healthcare and you're working towards making meaningful progress, ensuring that you are doing the right tasks in order to produce the right outcomes is extremely important. And as we're talking about productivity as a recipe, sometimes we have a little bit of too much of one thing, too less of another. And you were talking about roles and responsibilities. We might have our nurses doing way too much charting and coding instead of spending their time actually treating the patients. We may have other individuals that are, answering the phones, predominantly throughout the day, whenever they should actually be doing different roles and responsibilities. So as we're thinking about the recipe analogy, before we dive right into the 3 ingredients, what do you think are some of the ingredients that maybe clients have too much of and that, they're not focusing on? And what are maybe some of the ingredients they have too less of? And for our, participants, drop in the chat. Are there things that you believe your team's doing too much of right now? What are some of the ingredients you don't need? Maybe drama could be an ingredient that's not necessarily going to serve you well. Maybe emotional responses to your productivity reports and the red that you see could be something that's serving you not too well. So whenever you think about productivity as a recipe, what do people have too much of?
I think that's a loaded question. I think that it depends, right? It's going to be very circumstantial. It's going to depend on the department. It's going to depend on the leader. I think that you can have too many steps in a process. I think that we can overcomplicate things by adding too many steps. What we hear from our clients a lot is like clunky, too many clicks in documentation, having to repeat information or having to click through too many screens to get to where you need. It's not built correctly. So it's too much of something, to answering the same thing too many times. I think that you can have duplicate efforts a lot of times. But again, we end up with too much of things because we're trying to solve a problem, but we're not getting to the root cause of a problem, right? So if the reports that we get from finance are wrong, we may assign somebody the task of running that same report, but to get the information that we're looking for. So now we have 2 reports. Which one is the right report? Who's looking at which report? So we have too much of that. I think in the sense of not enough, I think we often hear communication, but I think communication is a really tough one because everybody communicates differently and there's different communication styles. So I don't know that we necessarily have too many communication styles, but we just may not have enough of the right communication for the individuals within our department and as leaders who we're trying to communicate with. So I think sometimes we could see not enough communication, which then can lead to barriers of influencing change, knowing what's coming, being prepared, or, you get the, well, nobody told me response from your team that maybe isn't exactly true. We just didn't communicate the right way, or we didn't communicate enough. So I think communication is something that we could have more of, the right communication.
Absolutely. The right communication is so absolutely important. And we're talking about communication. You were mentioning some of the analysis and running numbers again and again. And something that we have too much of sometimes is analysis. And we get paralyzed in running the numbers over and over again. And what there's not enough of in productivity are solutions. And the solutions are what are the action steps that you can take to actually influence the change. So too much, analysis and paralysis of analysis, not enough solutions. So let's really dive in and let's get to the actual recipe and the actual steps to the recipe. So there are three main ingredients that you need in order to influence productivity and build the recipe for success at your organization. You need clarity, which means you need to understand what you're working towards, what productivity is and how you're going to define it and what it means, and clarity around the goals for your organization. You need execution. Nothing happens until you act. And that means acting on the decisions that you made, moving towards your actual outcomes. Nothing's going to actually change until you act, align your team, and focus on getting results. And then third, you have to have momentum. So you have to have small wins that you're working towards. And if you can build out your productivity with having clarity, execution around the goals, and momentum towards those goals, you're going to win every single time. So let's break this down into the three ingredients and really dive deeper into each step. Let's start with clarity. So Randy Lynn, when you're talking about clarity, you mentioned communication, and we talked about the fact that we need to have a little bit more communication. What does that look like whenever organizations roll that out and they need to actually share the information, share the benchmarks, share all those stuff? What are we really talking about when we're talking about establishing clarity?
Well, I think it starts at the beginning. So when we roll out an engagement around productivity, and if we're going to benchmark, if we're going to set new targets, are those targets going to influence the budget? Are those targets going to drive cost savings? Are those targets going to be implemented at a specific date? And I think that is sometimes what is not, that step isn't taken to its fullest at the start of a lot of productivity engagements. And so as transparent as you can be, why are we doing this? Are we doing this because we are in a financial situation where we have to implement new targets, tighter targets that are going to allow us to have a cost savings that's going to give us to this dollar amount? Are we implementing productivity and new benchmarks because we're being proactive about planning for not this year's budget, but the following year's budget? Are we implementing productivity because we want it to be part of our culture of excellence? And having productivity and being a good steward of our resources is part of a culture of excellence. So explaining why it's happening from the very beginning. And if we're going to pretend like it's not to help with our financial situation and it really is, then that's going to be your pitfall. And everybody's going to see right through that. They're going to sniff that out immediately because they know. And so the more transparent we can be about why we're doing the project and what the goal is and what the outcome we want the outcome to be, the better off we're going to be. The worst thing is when we sit down with a department leader and they're like, I don't even know why you're here. Well, one, I think they're maybe full of it. You know why we're here. We're here to talk about productivity and benchmarking. But if it's true that it wasn't communicated and they really don't know why we're there, then shame on the leaders for not communicating it and making sure that everybody had a strong understanding. Whether they like the reason or not, at least they know.
And when I think about clarity and everything that you just said, I think about the fact that clarity creates the culture of excellence around productivity. And clarity also sets the tone for the fact the organization is working towards best practice. The organization is working towards becoming a championship team, becoming a better organization. Great hospitals, top 100 healthcare systems, whatever list you're looking at, those organizations have benchmarks. Those organizations have goals and they have clarity around those goals. And they have clarity, just like you were mentioning, around why they're working towards achieving those goals. And whenever all of those things are working together synergistically, you can have those solid conversations around the clarity of where you're moving and stay away from the drama of the conversation. Because sometimes whenever benchmarks are rolled out, everyone becomes very emotional. But if we're focused on the fact that we're putting these targets in place because we want to be the highest possible quality care organization, We want to provide the best possible value to our community and to our patients. We want to be an employer of choice. When you set those expectations on the front end and create the clarity around why you're putting these benchmarks in place, you can steer away from the drama. So when we're talking about drama and we're talking around productivity, where do you see drama showing up when we're having productivity conversations? And where do you see that bubbling up? And what can be done to really prevent that?
So I go back to clarity and communication around preventing it, but where do we see it show up? It shows up in a lot of places, the drama around productivity. And I think that, some of it is this emotional reaction to wanting to do the best we can. So as department leaders, we aren't setting ourselves up to be failures, right? We aren't going in and thinking like, I'm going to just do a terrible job at productivity and I'm not going to staff effectively and I'm not going to look at how I should be scheduling. We sometimes get caught up in our emotions around it and our feelings around how would our staff like to be scheduled. We want our staff to get all their hours. We don't want to flex them down. So now we are emotionally committed to our team, which is amazing because you're a great leader. But we also have to balance that with being fiscally responsible and understanding the impact of using emotion to drive things and not our critical thinking and our leadership skills and understanding the goals around productivity or other budgetary goals, operational goals, strategic goals, things like that. So I think the drama comes in because we want to defend what we're doing. We are working hard. We are stepping in and we are helping our team. And these leaders, they are sometimes working well beyond their 40 hours a week and there's nothing to show for it, right? Productivity doesn't even show for it because they're a salaried employee. We can't even see those hours in productivity. And so, they look great. Oh, I look great on productivity. But meanwhile, the leader is the one that's making it happen because they're putting in the extra time. And so I think that's where the drama comes in. I think drama also comes in because we don't like change. In general, change is hard. In general, trying to get other people to change is even harder. So maybe I've accepted the change as the leader, but now I have to influence change. And maybe I haven't been given that skill set yet. I haven't been educated or trained on really influencing change. So now I have to do something that I'm uncomfortable with. So I think that drama shows up in a lot of places. And I think drama shows up with denial because sometimes we don't want to believe the data. So we always want to vet our data. We want to make sure that our data is accurate. So to your point, we don't want to get stuck in the paralysis by analysis, but we have to have good, strong data and we can't deny the data. We have to believe the data.
Absolutely. When you have really strong data and you have information that you can actually use to help you determine the next steps and how you're going to influence change, you can then, use that information to move from the emotional conversations into a situation where you're focused on the outcomes. And when organizations get focused on outcomes and get focused on moving forward, now you move into the execution and the alignment conversations. And that's where the real magic happens. And I can't help but circle back to something that you said, regarding leadership that made me think about the leaders and the fact that we're really good in healthcare at, identifying strong individuals that are going to be able to move into those leadership ranks. And we talk a lot about that. We always say congratulations and good luck. And then we move them into the front line. But a part of the recipe for success is leadership development. It is developing that growth mindset and always looking at what can we do to get better. And that's either in the individual level of the manager and the leader or at the organizational level. And when you're talking about what can we do to get better, it goes back to that data at the organizational level, because when you have the data and the productivity and all the information and you build clarity around it, you can now move towards your execution plan. And when you start to move into execution, this is that second point. And we also talk a lot about acting, accelerating, and achieving. And the execution is the action. The execution is where the magic happens. We can spend all day long in meetings with our team, sharing the benchmarking report, sharing the information without actually taking an action to improve. So execution is really where the magic of productivity happens. Otherwise, if there's an improvement, it's really just, luck. Our productivity might just be improving because we're in January, February, and March, and we're really, really busy. But it's the execution that helps you to build a system where you have real productivity improvement, real efficiency improvement, and develop real staffing effectiveness. So organizations are starting to move into effectiveness, and they're starting to focus on execution, and they want to move forward with their productivity system, with their workforce optimization plan, with staffing effectiveness. What are ways that they can help their team focus on what has to happen and focus on the achievements? When everything seems urgent, how do you hone in on what you need
then
to do?
nothing is, and nothing gets done because we don't know where to start. Well, I think it's really having the leaders put a plan in place, a step-by-step plan with some small to-dos, small wins, so we can start to feel the momentum around that. I think it's encouraging the leaders to understand the data. What is the data telling you? Because the more you can understand the data, the more you know what to do with it. You can't execute on it if you don't understand it. And to your point, how did we have such a strong performance the past 3 pay periods? Was it because it's a high volume season, or is it because of something we did? And if we don't know the difference, then that's where we have to start. And it's understanding what the report and the data is telling us and how do we act upon it. And so I'll use this example. Just this week, I had a great conversation with a director for one of our clients. And it was the director that I met with and 3 of her managers. And we spent time dissecting the data to then make a plan. So we looked at the 13 pay period trend of performance and we said, how often did we hit 100%? How often did we hit our target? And we analyzed those pay periods and we said, what did that look like? We had X number of FTEs and we had X amount of volume. And so now the manager is saying, I can take that back to my team. I can take that back to my therapists and say, we have to hit this number of billable units a pay period for us to all be working at this FTE level to hit 100%. And so now we have a plan. We understand the data and now we can put a plan in place because now we're going to schedule accordingly. And then we take it back to the team and we say, this is what we need to do. And how are we going to add more patients to the schedule? How are we going to reduce our no-shows? How are we going to reduce our cancellations? And so then it's starting to put some of those things into practice that we can gain momentum from. And then you go back to the team and you say, look, we did it. We did it 3 pay periods in a row because of what you did to change the process, what you did to change the day-to-day operations. And now we're seeing the outcome and you celebrate it.
That's such a great example. And I'm going to build off of the therapy example with another client that we were working with that had similar conversations. And he had an aha moment during the conversations where he said, you mentioned that best practice organizations really expect that their therapists are productive about 80% of the time. And looking at my expectations of my team and their schedules, I'm only expecting them to be productive about 60% of the time. So now I can make the connection, and he could make it clearly and understood the difference between where he was performing a best practice just by understanding that 80% versus 60%. And we were in another meeting with a client last week where we were educating on rolling out the biweekly reports and rolling that out. And we're going through the 13 pay period trends and we're going through all the information. And I can tell this leader, things are starting to click. And she's looking at the numbers. She's looking at the variance. Yes, there were negative FTE variances. Yes, the report was showing something. And then she raised her hand and she said, so are you telling me that what this report is showing me is that my providers are coming in late for their appointments and that's impacting the results? And I said, yes, because if your providers are coming in and your first case start times are late or they're not on time, it's delaying everything. So yes, it's going to show up. And then she asked another question that shared, and so is this also showing up with our no-show rates and our cancellation that are trending very high? I said, yes, those are also connecting. So as you start to have the conversations and unravel things and show things, everything plays into where those examples are. And the leaders start to actually understand how they can execute. But once they start to make those connections and they're executing, the next step comes into how can we build out accountability around achieving productivity targets, around achieving best practice, around the expectations of productivity and workforce optimization so it doesn't feel like punishment?
That's a great question. And I think that, it goes back to leadership. It goes back to that culture of excellence and it being an expectation that as the leader of this department, you have these goals to achieve, which is achieving your productivity target, which is making a difference around process improvement, which is influencing change. And that has to be completely widespread across the system, across the organization. It can't be in pockets. So when we want to instill accountability, it has to be a level playing field. Everybody is held to the same level of accountability, the same expectations. We don't pardon someone over here because they made a good case. It's what I always say to our clients. I'm like, you can ask nicely for me to change a target, but that doesn't mean I'm going to change it. And so we really want to hold that accountability at a level of culture of excellence. And it doesn't just fall into productivity. It's all aspects of your leadership as a department leader. Productivity is just part of it. So when it's part of that balance around your strategic, your financial, your operational, your productivity goals, along with what you're doing for quality, patient satisfaction, employee engagement, it all rolls into accountability because we have to be accountable for all of those things. It's not just productivity. We can't just say, oh, we're only going to hold you accountable for productivity and we're going to ignore all of the other things. Or we're going to just hold you accountable for patient satisfaction and employee engagement and forget productivity. It all has to be balanced. And I think that's where that culture of excellence comes in because it's not just one. It's the balance of all of those things.
And when we're mentioning balance, you talked about employee engagement and you mentioned that we really have to pay attention to leadership as well. And I think whether it's the C-suite, whether it's the director level, the managers, as we're thinking about that, we really have to listen to our team also. Hear what they're saying, listen to what their responses are. And sometimes those best solutions for executing are going to come from the front line. They understand what's happening. They understand where things are. And we have to listen to what's occurring so we can move things forward and actually hold our team accountable to the outcomes. Share why it's important for us to change, build the urgency around the change, and help execute and move things forward. And by really delivering at that level, everyone gets on the same page and we can actually move the needle and move things forward. And that's where execution makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. We build momentum. Once you start acting, once you start executing on things, you build momentum, you're held accountable to it, and now we're moving. And you can't stop. You can't just do a little bit and then back off, and then do a little bit and back up. We're not going to get anywhere. We have to keep the momentum going, and we have to give our leaders the tools and the resources that they need to have that momentum. Nothing's worse than not having the tools that you need to get the job done. And I think that we find that, or we don't even realize that that's missing sometimes. So going back to the ingredients that are missing, maybe sometimes it's the tools or the resources that the leader needs to help with the execution in order to get the momentum, in order to keep going. And so I think really understanding and listening, as you said, to what they need, your team, your leaders, whatever that might be, so that they can be set up for success.
Yes. And I think setting individuals up for success so that they have the knowledge and the tools and the information that's necessary for them to move forward, so important. We talk a lot about building the anatomy of a target and breaking it down to pieces so that all that the leaders really understand what pieces affiliated with what part of their staffing makes a big difference. And one of the biggest barriers is not understanding productivity at that detailed level. So really understanding how we can move the bar forward so that we build that momentum. And momentum comes from celebrating small wins. And we mentioned earlier on this, LinkedIn Live, that if something is positive and something is making change and you have good momentum, recognize your leader, celebrate it. If your productivity improved, talk about it. If you were able to schedule more visits with a therapist, share it, celebrate it. If you were able to reduce your no-show rate, share it, celebrate it. You really want to focus on what's working, celebrating the wins, because that's going to bring more wins. And that builds momentum. And momentum is one of those biggest pieces that can make or break a productivity engagement. And so recognition goes a long way in celebrating progress. So how are some ways that we've seen clients celebrate progress, recognize their employees, recognize their team, and really generate that excitement around the outcome so that they can really move things forward faster?
Well, I think we need to think of it in kind of in layers, because I think that there's the recognition and the celebration that needs to happen at the department level. I think that as a department level leader, we need to acknowledge the efforts that our team is putting in. So going back to that rehab example around the goal of we're going to hit this many billable units and everybody's going to hit this FTE. This is where we need to be. This is that sweet spot. And then the recognition and the reward is we're not flexing people down because we're hitting that volume level. And we don't have to, call people off because we're able to be proactive about things. And it's going to, they're going to feel that. That's going to be a satisfier right there, is that we're not flexing anybody down. But you can recognize the efforts in a variety of different ways. And some of your, I guess, normal recognition with, how can we celebrate this? Bring in a pizza party, cookies, whatever that might be. But I think it's the communication around the recognition and how we got there that really makes the impact, so that I know my effort is making a difference. And I think that that's really the part that is going to keep it going, because we can have pizza parties all day long, but if I know that my effort is making a difference, that's going to be impactful. And then I think too, it's kind of a loaded question around the senior level of things with what we can do to recognize productivity, because again, it depends on where you are and why you're doing productivity. But we've seen, acknowledgement around reinvestment into equipment. We've seen the acknowledgement and the tie back of the productivity savings to bonuses or salary increases. And I think that at the senior level is a strong positive choice to communicate those connections. And when you can make those connections, people understand that their efforts are resulting in these things. And it's not just, here we go again, another project. Here we go again, doing more with less. It's really the improvement for the organization at large, or investing in the organization, investing back into the team, that's going to, build that momentum and that understanding of my efforts are creating this.
Yeah, productivity produces positive results because it shines a light on all of those things that you just mentioned, and shines a light on what's working, shines a light on areas of opportunity, shines a light on what we could be doing differently, shines a light on things like length of stay, where maybe we need to make some changes to our length of stay in order to impact our productivity within the emergency department. It shines a light on areas like the length of time it takes for us to schedule patients and get access to our clinics. So productivity produces positive results because it gets us focused on really moving forward with purpose. And when you move forward with purpose, you can influence and change many different areas and aspects of your operations that can move the hospital, the healthcare system, the clinics into a sustainable financial and operational future that can balance all of the different pieces that we've talked about today. And when you're moving towards that sustainability, the one thing that I want to mention is productivity is iterative, meaning that it's not a one and done situation. All too often, consulting firms sometimes are brought in and it's a one-time drop of the productivity, a one-time review of the information. And we really need to start thinking about sustainable productivity, sustainable performance improvement as foundational. Productivity is a foundational, I'd say, acumen that you develop and core area that you need to focus on with your leadership. And it's something that should become continuous and done continuously over time. So it's something that becomes core. They understand it's not just a short-term fix, because when it's a short-term fix, it does become the reduction in force. And the reason that everyone shies away from productivity is because it should never be a reduction in force. When productivity is done correctly, you should never have to rely on that because you have the tools in place. You're educating your leaders. You're making positive changes on a day in, day out basis, shift to shift. You're looking at the future. You're proactively addressing things. So when you're building the case for productivity with clarity, you're developing out your action plans consistently over time and executing on those, and then building momentum through the small wins and taking those steps forward. Now you're changing consistently and building that strength, and you're building that force, and you're making small and steady improvements day in, week in, month in. And before you know it, you've had a dramatic change, like Randy Lynn mentioned, where you've improved by $2 million. You've improved by $3 million. You can quantify that, share it with your team, buy new equipment, give it back in a raise, celebrate that, and reinvest in your team members. And when that happens, now everyone wants to understand, what can I do differently? Where can I improve? What should I be looking at? And that's when our phone starts ringing off the hook, and we're scheduling one-on-one coaching calls with our clients because they want to understand their report. They want to know what they should be doing and how can they be the next department recognized. But you need to make those connections. You need to make the connections by clarity around what the target is, making the connections on how that target applies to their individual department, their staffing grid, their day-to-day schedules, their outcomes, their objectives for operations, what their execution plan should be in the 30 days, in the 60 days, in the 90 days, and then ultimately, what can they do to build momentum? So, Randy Lynn, what are some of the lasting things you'd like to share with anyone about the recipe for success? Let's say that there's a hospital healthcare system that's out there. They're really struggling right now. Maybe they have targets in place. They're not able to achieve them. Maybe they have a big budget gap that they're not able to get. Things are really heavy right now with some of the regulatory changes happening. What advice would you give them? What can they focus on right now, and what should be their takeaway?
I think that if you're going to do productivity, and I think everybody should do productivity because I think that it is a key part of success and a culture of excellence, but commit to it and commit to it the right way. I think that, everybody has room for improvement. I think that our processes are not perfect. I think that we have a lot of opportunity to improve our processes, to improve the experience for our employees so that they're coming in and they have the right operational plan in place that isn't clunky, it isn't full of rework. I think that there are just opportunities for productivity across the board, but if you're going to do it, commit to it and do it the right way. I think that you can't just haphazardly throw an email out to colleagues and ask for productivity targets. I think that's going to set you up for failure right there. I think that you can't not communicate the reason behind why you're doing it. I think that you need to, as senior leaders, get down to the level of your department level leaders and explain to them the importance of productivity and the importance of their efforts, and recognize when those leaders at the department level are shining in the aspect of productivity, then they get it. And I think that we need to give these department leaders the right tools and resources. Like you said, when we're able to sit down and have one of those conversations with a department leader where we're peeling back the layers, setting a plan in place around hitting a target, they're going to hit that target because they have the support, they have the tools, the resources, but they also have the accountability because we're going to hold them accountable too. They know that. They know that they have to report back to one of us and say what has or hasn't happened. But I think if you're going to do it, you have to commit to it. Otherwise, any momentum that you gain, you're going to lose. And you're going to go right back to where you started. And productivity is going to have a negative connotation, a negative reputation because it wasn't done right. And therefore, it wasn't successful. So you've got to commit to it.
Commitment. I love that. Do it right. I think that's great. Great advice as well. And when we break it down, healthcare leaders are high performers. Healthcare leaders want to be best practice. They want to be in the top 10%. They want to do the right things. And as you mentioned, we want to commit, do it the right way, and always follow the recipe for success. So we've covered a lot of topics today. We've talked about productivity producing positive results. And the recipe for success at your organization is really founded in creating clarity, created execution, and then building that momentum that's going to drive you towards those positive results. And if you are looking for a solution for productivity, whether you've been able to achieve everything that you've worked towards, whether there are still gaps, whatever that purpose is, you really want to focus on building the right sustainable productivity system. Reach out to us at info@altiushcg.com, 877-337-3011, or tag us at altiushcg. We're available for strategy sessions. We're available for one-on-one conversations. And regardless of where you are in your current productivity journey, there's something that we can do to support you. You might already think you have it solved. You may have it solved, but there's always that next level. Championship teams never stop getting better. Championship healthcare organizations never stop improving. So productivity, it's your foundation for a culture of excellence, and you do it through clarity, execution, and momentum. And Altius looks forward to supporting you. So thank you all for joining today. We look forward to the next LinkedIn Live. We're going to commit to doing these more often, and let us know what your takeaways were from this session. Enjoy.